Alrighty, here's a really quick Antebellum South review. Hopefully it'll be helpful. The Antebellum South, of course, is the time before the Civil War in the United States in the South, from the late 1700s through the 1861. Of course, during the heart of the Antebellum South period, during in the early 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, cotton became the chief part of the economy. That's because Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, and there's great demand for cotton for textiles. This time period, when the cotton was king, was called the cotton boom. It's the most important cash crop. It was grown in what's called the cotton belt, which extended from South Carolina across the central and southern Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, into Arkansas, and northern Louisiana, and even a little bit into Texas. Um, Transportation for the cotton was usually transported by wagon to steamboats and then put on caravels and sent around the world. Another industry flourished at this time, and that was the slave trading industry because it went with the cotton as they needed workers for the cotton, or at least they thought they did. Social classes in the Antebellum South, the planters, which were only about 1 or 2% of the total population, were the top class, and they had most of the money, power, resources, and control. Below them, most Southerners were yeoman farmers, who were just everyday farmers growing staple crops, food crops, trying to make a living. The poor whites were the poorest people, and a lot of times they were pushed up into the Appalachian Mountains as the good land was already taken. And they scratched out a living there. Some of them also worked as sharecroppers or worked as hired hands for some of the other farmers. But most of the poor whites could not afford their own land, or at least their own good land. Free African Americans, there were about 250,000 by 1860 free African Americans living in the South. Most of them lived in the southern cities like Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans. These free African Americans were under constant oppression and were treated in discrimination and prejudice that was very horrific, but at least they were not slaves. On the bottom of the totem pole were the slaves. Slaves were saw as complete property for their owners and could be treated basically any way that the owner wanted to treat them. In most cases, that was very bad, particularly on the large plantations. Speaking of slavery, how did the slave system work? Well, there was lots of physical control with terrible punishments. There was also mental oppression and control. Um, they worked the slaves very hard. They withheld food at times. They made them feel like they had no hope and were less than human. They used the gang labor system on the plantations to get things done. They worked as a group. Um, Sometimes they had quotas they had to fill. If they did not, terrible punishments were given out. The slave codes were legal laws that allowed the slave owners to do basically whatever they wanted with their slaves as long as they didn't educate them. Slavery was a tremendously hard life as they had poor food, poor living conditions, horrible punishments, families broken apart, lack of respect, lack of hope. Is very, very, very difficult. That being said, many slaves were able to kind of keep their hope and their faith through their spirituality, through making family the best of family that they could, from making good food out of bad ingredients, from singing spirituals and telling folk tales. Spirituals were emotional songs that tried to give hope or an outlet at least for the pain and the anguish. So what we can learn from the slaves is they made the best they could out of absolutely horrible situation. Life lessons from this time period. What the South really missed it was they did not make progress and growth economically. Didn't really progress in the factories while the rest of the North and in Britain were building factories. They did not. They did not make progress and growth in society morally as they stuck with slavery and the horribleness of that. So we have to continue to make progress and growth. Unintended consequences, of course, Eli Whitney's cotton gin was a great invention, but its unintended consequence was that it led to the explosion of slavery in the slave trade because of the profitability of cotton. Prejudice, we must watch our prejudices, watch our discrimination, our isms, sexism, racism, ageism. All these things make us weaker as a person, as a community, and as a nation. Evil and immorality can creep up on people. You have to be aware of that. You wonder, how did these horrible things in slavery happen? How did people accept that? How could they sleep at night, the things they did to the slaves, but it crept up on them a little bit at a time. So you have to watch, um, you know, you start out with a little bit of evil or a little bit of immorality in your life, you get comfortable with that, and you add a little bit more and a little bit more, and through the generations, that's how the slavery was added. And then the great lesson from the slaves was they're able to find, many of them were able to find some joy and peace on the inside, no matter their external circumstances. If you can do that, then you can be free no matter what is going on around you. I hope this was helpful. This quick review is helpful, and that's all I got.